Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of The Architect. My name is Mike. Today is Saturday, April 12th. I hope you all are enjoying the Masters tournament. It seems to be another exciting one. Can't wait to for tomorrow. Usually the last day is the best day, right? On Sunday. So can't wait for tomorrow. I'm going to be watching that. Hope you guys are getting some well needed rest this weekend. And of course, I'm back from a 2 week hiatus or a 1 week hiatus, actually, where we ended up on talking about a two-part series on enterprise AI, as it's a very popular subject. So I just want to go back. I always start the podcast this way and going back and talking about what exactly we covered and kind of how we're mapping this out and growing into the content that we're delivering. So obviously we started with Nutanix platform and the core foundational aspect of it, and we moved into more of the automation side of it, then into our unstructured data services, moved on to Kubernetes, and then of course into AI. In episode 5, we talked about Nutanix Kubernetes platform, and we really just touched on it, right? So when you do an hour session on it, a entire Kubernetes platform, it's very difficult to kind of touch on some of the intricacies and some of the value there. And so we're going to take a step back, and we're going to do a multi-part series on the Nutanix Kubernetes platform. And it's funny that we talked about and then ended on AI, but I also talked about in my podcast with Damon about the importance of Kubernetes, especially with the use case around AI and running AI applications, and why it's the best operating system, right, for AI. And as a matter of fact, I just released a blog post this week on unknowntech.io, which is my blog, and this is what's this podcast is sponsored by, um, on the reasons why Kubernetes is the quintessential operating system for AI use cases and AI workloads. And I hope you go and read that. You can, again, go to that at unknowntech.io, and that's my blog post, as well as viewing all of the other live streams and podcasts that we've done up to this point. So we've done 8 episodes, and we took a week off last week. And as a matter of fact, it worked out good and bad. Just a quick story. Um, my main PC actually sprung a leak. Thank God it didn't cause a fire, but it basically destroyed 90% of my components. I had water cooling in that solution. It was an all-in-one water cool. So it wasn't custom water cooled, but the first time I've ever had that happen to me, actually sprung a leak and pretty much destroyed 90% of my components. So even if I did have a schedule of last Saturday, I probably would have had to cancel it because that took precedence in going through that cleanup and working with the vendor that supplied the all-in-one water cooler on replacing my parts. So I'm still going through that process, and of course, it's been a challenge. As you know, when you buy a lot of these components, they're not from the United States; they're from Asia, more than likely, Taiwan or China or whatever. And of course, right now, it's not very comfortable dealing with those folks. So hopefully we get that worked out and we'll get my main PC up. But I have this backup PC here, and we're moving forward and going through the NKP content. So again, let's get back on track and talk about Nutanix Kubernetes platform and what it is. So what I'll do before we do that though is I want to just bring up this caption here. So you can see here on the bottom link here of the YouTube channel. If you're watching on LinkedIn, generally speaking, that's okay to watch there. But what I've noticed is the quality of the stream is not great, and I believe that has to do with LinkedIn's codec that's being used there. The reality is, I stream to both LinkedIn and YouTube, and so if you want to have a higher quality stream and be allowed to kind of interact with chat, I know we really haven't had a lot of chat interaction in the past, and I'm hoping that picks up here in the future. But you can actually interact with chat in YouTube, and I believe you'll get a better quality stream there. So the link is below. I'll leave this up for a few more seconds. You guys can actually go there. So if you're on LinkedIn, you can remain to stay on. You can choose to stay on LinkedIn if you want. But I believe there's a better quality stream on YouTube. So once you head over there, if you get a chance, that's a link below, and you can watch it, the live stream on YouTube. Now, there is a delay between um, my streaming service. I use what's called Restream, and of course, YouTube and LinkedIn. It's typically around 30 seconds, so I don't get live chat right away. So if you actually send a chat message or if you want to interact, I won't get that right away, right? It'll take a while for me to get it, and then of course a little bit of delay in the response. So I know people have asked why don't I use OBS? To be honest, I just haven't had the time to set up OBS. I have it installed, but I have to actually configure the overlays and the music and everything else, and that really is uh, not hard, but it's time consuming. And of course, I try to give you guys a somewhat of a professional look from the stream quality perspective, with overlays and background music and things like that. So Restream has been doing okay for now, but of course, I think as I look at the quality, it's in 1080p now. The quality of the music seems to be decent. Some of the audio sometimes goes in and out. You probably notice that a little bit. So I think that's probably due to Restream, because my internet's really good and I'm on a 10 gig network here. So I know it's not my internal networking. So, all right, be that as it may, I'm going to get off this and we're going to get into the actually subject matter. So let's hide this here and get into the demo here, which I'm actually going to share my screen. Just bear with me here. Okay, so again, we're talking about Nutanix Kubernetes platform, and we're going to dive a little deeper into this a bit on the architecture and the configuration of how to get started with this, right? So, Nutanix had its own solution a while back called NKE, formerly Karbon, and that was Nutanix Kubernetes Edition. And really, what that was, it was a Kubernetes orchestration engine, right? So we provide a Node OS. It was very basic from a functionality perspective, but it allowed you to actually handle the infrastructure side of Kubernetes fairly easily, right? Where we actually, again, supplied a Node OS image. We managed that for you. You use that Node OS image, and you basically used, a framework on the back end before we introduced CAPI. And we actually introduced Cluster API at the tail end of NKE before we acquired a Day2IQ, and now it's converted to NKP. So again, we've had our own solution, and some of you may have that solution today. NKE will be sunset right in October of 2025, and so we're working with our current customers to kind of move them over to the new Nutanix Kubernetes platform solution, which was part of the acquisition of Day2IQ. Even previous to NKE, however, we had what's called ACS, which was Acropolis Container Services, and this is really before we decided to really move towards the Kubernetes engine, Kubernetes side, and really focus on containerization with Docker. And so we actually had ACS, which was Acropolis Container Services, built within the platform. And so we've been working with containerization for the better part of, I want to say, 6-7 years now. I'm coming up on 10 years at Nutanix next month, and so we've had been working with containerization for a while. And as a matter of fact, even our core platform service capability within some of the feature sets and things are being delivered as containers. You don't see that, right? But we do that on the back end for you, right? So we deploy Kubernetes and container services and deliver those core services on as containers. And you're going to see that mature over time, like things in our control plane, features, functionality, things like that will start to really dive more into containerization. Lastly, and I don't think I talked about this before, is Nutanix is in early access right now of delivering our HCI stack, our data services, within native Kubernetes on EKS and soon on-prem Kubernetes solutions, right? Like NKP is an example. So, why would we do that? Well, we really started as an HCI company, and we are very mature in this space. And as a matter of fact, due to the obvious Broadcom challenges, right, with VMware acquisition, there are companies looking for new infrastructure services and new platforms, especially virtualization, and they're looking for platforms, right? So that's the difference of what we see previous Broadcom is really this transition of IT innovation moving to a more server-based platform. So what I mean by that is software-defined, server-based, right? So instead of having these building these pieces and parts to kind of create a custom platform for your use cases within the enterprise, we're seeing more of this I want to buy a platform that has these capabilities natively. I call them table stakes capabilities, right? But they're important enterprise capabilities like virtualization, storage services, data services, distributed scale out, and of course all of the table stake features that you would expect in an enterprise platform around virtualization, right? Templating, live migration, cross cluster live migration, advanced networking capabilities, storage and data services, right? All of those things build that solid foundation of the platform. But of course, customers are also asking for, okay, well, what, as we move into modern applications and cloud native technologies, and as we go through our application modernization effort through our digital transformation, what services can the platform provide? And really, it's about delivering a capability that not only provides you those capabilities around Kubernetes and containerization, but also gives you a production ready platform and integration. So, integration with the platforms that you use today. So, for example, if I have VMware today and I'm staying with VMware, well, what containerization services can you provide? What data services can you provide for containers, right? Or if I want to run it on bare metal, or if I'm in the cloud, and this is what we're seeing play out, and especially in the enterprise, in accounts that I'm engaged in, a lot of customers have multiple Kubernetes solutions, okay, and they'll have maybe a cloud provider solution like through EKS, through AWS as an example, or AKS or Azure, and they'll have an on-prem solution. Maybe it's OCP or maybe it's Rancher or something like that, right? Those experiences are wildly different. And we can sit here and talk about Kubernetes being, oh, it's just Kubernetes. Right. Underneath, right, is Kubernetes, but it's proprietary in those cases, right? And within the cloud, it's deployed differently and managed differently. So it's not the same experience. And that's what customers are being challenged with again, right? It goes back to what we talked about early on when we talked about the platform, where customers had all of this disparate hardware and software that they had to stitch together, okay, to make a platform. And that is challenged in itself from an operational perspective. It's challenged from a support perspective, and things go wrong. And when they do go wrong, where do you go? Is it a storage issue? Oh, I got to call, HPE, or I got to call, Pure or something like that. Is it a VM virtual issue? Oh, I got to call VMware. Is it a server issue? I got to call, you name it, Dell, Cisco, HPE, IBM, Lenovo, etc. You have the gamut of having to figure out where the problems are, where the performance issues lie, and to kind of put this together. Now, solution providers have partnered together to provide not turnkey solutions, but reference architecture designs, right? And they've even provided a single support model, right? So, for example, vBlock was the quintessential example of a reference architecture, right, with a single support number, and customers found a lot of value in that. But it still was a reference architecture, meaning it wasn't like a lot of interoperability there, native interoperability, right? It would stitch together and validate it. And so you would take Cisco UCS, and you would take EMC at the time, Arrays, and you would take VMware, right? And you would, what vBlock provided was a validation of interoperability of versioning, okay, and then that single support model. And with that, they were able to kind of say, okay, well, we expect you to have this experience. And so what's happened with HCI is we've really combined all of those things from an infrastructure perspective, and it's running on pure software. And so it's purely software defined. And we look at these modern platforms as server based because it's just simple, right? We can now put many things in a server outside of just compute, right? RAM, CPU. Right now we can do advanced networking capabilities, right? Now you can put a lot of storage inside a single chassis, right? From a server perspective, and you can use software to combine all those things. And I know what you're thinking probably, well, Mike, what's this have to do with NKP? And we're going to get to that in a minute. But and HCI has been around for a while, but the reality is that has simplified that stack, right? And now you don't have to focus on undifferentiated value. And you hear me talk about this because it's still valuable to your organization to make sure your infrastructure is working and fast and reliable and agile, right? But it's undifferentiated value. It's just expected. So your customers expect it, your CXO expects it, and so I highly doubt, and I don't see this happen often, where CXOs come in and say, "Congrats, you're doing a great job," and the lights are on. What they want to see is, how can you help me be competitive? That's what they're fundamentally asking. How can we simplify, cut costs, and be competitive? And because they can take that back and go to the CEO or board level and say, we now can give you this ability, right, to be more competitive in what we do. And that's more important, and that's differentiated value. And that's what we want everyone to kind of shift and focus on. The same thing applies to Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is a different animal, as you know. Now, experts in Kubernetes, and I've heard many podcasts and people talk about this, is experts will say, well, Kubernetes is just Linux and a lot of Linux things behind the scenes. And they're right. I'm not saying they're not right. But you have to look at it from a VM admin and a storage admin perspective. Okay? Because that's what's been out there for the past 15, 20 years is virtualization, storage, right? Virtual machines. And that's what people are used to. And so we have to fundamentally take the messaging to our, not only our customers, but even internally to our teams, to enable them so they understand it. And then on top of that, we have to provide a solution that doesn't make it simple, but simplifies the stack, simplifies the operation. And there's difference between that. When I say something is simple, what I think when we say things like that is we just kind of avoid the complexity conversation. Underneath, the complexity is still there. Okay? Underneath, right? When you dig, the complexity is still there. The value is in presenting it to you in a simplistic way, operationalizing in a simplistic way, right? And still giving you those enterprise and cloud native and innovative features, right? That's the beauty of simplicity, right? Our founder at Nutanix used to say that simplicity is genius, because complexity on the back end it's very hard to make something complex simple, and to make consumption simple at the same time, right? So meaning presenting to you in a way that it makes it simple. And that's the idea of NKP. NKP is really providing you not a simple Kubernetes platform, but a production-ready platform which simplifies operations, simplifies deployment. Okay, and that's what NKP provides. So just to review what NKP is, you'll see this diagram here that I'm sharing with you, and you can see here the NKP environment. NKP is software, just like Nutanix is software. Okay, and customers will, we may argue that, oh, it's HCI, it's software defined. Nutanix has always been a software company. Even though we ship an appliance, we have an option to ship an appliance, a physical server, right, or servers with the solution. It's our software. We don't build those servers, right? Even the NX solution that we provide is built by Supermicro. Or if we partner with Dell, Dell's providing the servers. Or if we partner with HPE, they're providing the servers. Nutanix has never built servers, right? We are a software company. We always have been since day one. Okay, so that's one part of it. So software defined, right? The second part of it is this transition of Nutanix to give you more choice, right? And allow you to run that software anywhere. And that's the goal, the ultimate goal of Nutanix. To say, okay, you like the cloud, you want to get the benefits of the cloud, fine. You like HPE or Dell or Cisco, fine, right? We're not going to have an opinion there. Because we're not providing value there. Where we're providing value is within the software stack, right? And the same thing with our HCI solution and the solutions I've showed you so far. NKP is the same thing. Okay. Now, we do have an opinion on where NKP runs, right? From a perspective of again, not forcing you down a path, but from a perspective of you will get a very good experience if you decide to use the full platform. And why is that? Because we have native integration and all these things. Now, I'm not saying we don't have native integration with other things, because we use, for example, when we talk about how we deploy, we use Cluster API, and we use CapV for VMware and CapX for Nutanix, and you can deploy it on native cloud or within EKS or AKS, right? Or bare metal. So you have those options to do that, okay? But the additional added value that what we're providing in the platform is, oh, we can also deliver data services and database as a service and data protection and cloning, okay, and a distributed compute model, which kind of mirrors up to what Kubernetes is, a distributed platform. So in that sense, we believe that, from our opinion, you'll get the best outcome by going with NKP on Nutanix. Now, does that mean that you choose the Nutanix platform underneath or the data services? No. And we have customers that aren't. We have customers running VMware. We have customers in the cloud. We have customers that use NKP on bare metal, and they use their own third-party storage, right? But it goes back to what I talked about before. Now you're having, once again, to stitch those things together and get support differently, right? From different vendors, different vendor management, different supportability, different deployment scenarios. With NKP, when you deploy on Nutanix, CSI is already there. It's already integrated. Okay, so the CSI, your storage stack is there. The integration with the storage stack is there post implementation, right? All of those things are already there. Okay. Now, other enterprise customers that we have say, well, we have our own Kubernetes platform like Rancher, like OCP that we like, and we want to stay on that. And that's fine. That's great. But I go back to what I said about the value of the underlying platform, right? So even if you don't choose Nutanix Kubernetes platform, we can provide tremendous value in the underlying services capability around, like I said, same thing, data services, database as a service, compute, right? Virtualization stack that's easy, which we don't charge an arm and a leg for, right? It's included with the platform, right? AHV as an example. And so that's the value there. Okay, so let's get into NKP though. So the NKP environment basically contains three things, right? You have a management cluster, that's the NKP control plane. You have managed clusters. Over to the right-hand side, you see managed clusters. Those are clusters that are deployed by the management cluster and managed by the management cluster. And then you have at the bottom attached clusters. So just to talk about the supportability a little bit, we have full support with, again, Nutanix infrastructure, VMware and third-party infrastructure, AWS, native EKS, as well as pre-provisioned, as well as EC2 instances, right? So you don't have to use EKS as an example. You can deploy this on EC2 and use EBS backend for storage. You can do all that. Same thing with Azure. A little bit different with GKE. So we can attach GKE clusters, and we can attach. Matter of fact, we can attach any, conformant Kubernetes distribution to our platform to manage applications. We don't manage the lifecycle of the cluster. So at the cluster level, we can't manage like Kubernetes operations like upgrades or any of the platform applications, right? In attached clusters, but in managed clusters, we can. And of course, the management cluster we do, right? Because that's self-managed, because the management cluster actually manages itself, manages its own cluster, okay? So what does this look like from a deployment process? So I just drew this up real quick before, and this is Microsoft Whiteboard. I haven't used this. I just started using this. I have a Wacom tablet that I'm trying to figure out how to best leverage for these sessions. And there's still some things I have to go through to get it right, and I don't know if Microsoft Whiteboard is the right tool for that. So I'm going through some different whiteboarding tools that work really well with the Wacom tablet, so we can actually do some drawing and things like that. But so what do you do to kind of stand this up? Very, very simple. You have a workstation or a Bastion. In my case, I use WSL. We've talked about this before, right? I have Ubuntu Linux running on my Windows 11 Pro workstation that I'm on right now, right? That actually runs Ubuntu Linux. So in Warp, you can see here, I'm logged in to, you can see the icon, my WSL Ubuntu Linux machine. So I'm in Warp, and I have Linux running on Windows 11. I think a lot of folks actually have been asking for this, and I see customers asking for this a lot, especially in their dev environments. Matter of fact, I'm working with a customer right now. WSL had to be was extremely important to them for their virtual machines as we migrate them off of VMware onto AHV. So, what does the Linux distro require? Well, this is basically your bootstrap. Okay, you're basically leveraging this machine as your bootstrap to actually bootstrap the NKP cluster. Okay, so on this machine, you'll need a Linux distro. In my case, I have Ubuntu, the latest distro. You'll need the NKP software, the package. Okay, now we have multiple packages. If you're in an air-gapped environment, we have an air-gap package. And if you're in a non-air-gapped environment, we have a non-air-gapped package. In my environment, I am non-air-gapped. In the next episode of NKP, we will deploy an air-gapped environment. Okay, because there's a little bit of difference there. You have to have a container runtime. So you can use Docker, you can use Podman. As an example, you have to have kubectl installed, of course. Helm, you'll need Helm because Helm is part of the implementation. You will need, in a production environment, you'll need certs. And in some cases, you could do just a self-signed cert. Okay, and in my environment, I have a self-signed cert. That kind of bit me last week's episode or last episode around AI because OpenAI API does not support a self-signed cert. So I couldn't show you in my lab leveraging like Flowise, an example, like that doesn't support that. So it's better to have a real cert, especially if you're testing this, or obviously when you're going into production, you should have a real cert. Okay. You need to have a Node OS image. Okay. So whether you're leveraging, and there are different Node OS supportability types. Matter of fact, let's just go to that really quick under supported operating systems. And I think I covered this a little bit a while ago. So under our documentation, we have supporting operating systems for the infrastructure that NKP will be running on. And you have Nutanix, we support 3, Rocky Linux 9.5, 2204 Ubuntu, and RHEL 8, and 9's coming shortly in the next release. And it tells you exactly what we support, right? Can we support FIPS compliancy? Can we support air-gapped? Which distros support GPUs? Which support distros, GPUs and air-gapped? And which supports Nutanix Image Builder? So we're going to talk about Image Builder here in a little while. But we have our own Node OS based on Rocky as well. Okay, so you can download that from the portal as well. And if you're okay with using our Node OS image, we can do that. You can also create your own Node OS image from Rocky, Ubuntu, or RHEL. Okay, and we'll talk about what that looks like because we package the Nutanix Image Builder within the package for Nutanix. On AWS, you can run in native EC2 as an example, or you can run on EKS. And so we have customers doing both. And people always ask me, why would I do that? Like, why would I not just use the native? Because it goes back to what I talked about before. A lot of customers have multiple distros now. There's one customer that I've worked with in the past. They have 5 distributions of Kubernetes in the cloud, on-prem. They have 3 on-prem. Okay. And it's just very hard to manage that. And so the next question is, well, why wouldn't they just consolidate? Well, there are reasons behind that. Some distros are required based on the software they're using. So, for example, they have to use OCP for specific software. They use Maximo, and Maximo is only supported on OpenShift. Okay, so they have to use OCP as an example. There are other solutions out there that they like to leverage, like Rancher. And so this customer has 3 on-prem and 2 cloud solutions, right? And so when they manage this, it's very difficult. It's not a unified experience at all. And again, we can go back and argue, well, it's Kubernetes. No, it's Kubernetes, true, but there's all the other core service components to make Kubernetes production ready that are different. And they're different how what's supported from a Node OS perspective. Like, for example, OCP only supports RHEL, right? Core OS. So you can't support any other operating system. What if you have to support another Node OS type? So that becomes a challenge. So what you want is a platform that can give you the flexibility to run anywhere and to use any Node OS, multiple Node OS types, GPU support, FIPS, compliancy, all of those things, air gap, non-air gap, in the cloud, on bare metal, and you need to have that agility, right? And that's what customers are looking for. Microsoft Azure. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can basically deploy NKP and use these as these Node OS types, right, for the infrastructure you're using. Now, I want to talk about pre-provision because it covers a couple areas. Pre-provision is bare metal, includes bare metal, but also includes pre-provision on even Nutanix or in the cloud, as an example. You can have pre-provision infrastructure there for Node OSs and Node machines, right? And so you're able to use those things and prep those things, and we'll actually, prep those pre-provision environments, whether they're bare metal or whether they're virtual machines running on AHV as an example, or running in the cloud. And of course, vSphere we support, and then of course EKS and AKS. So outside of using EC2, and it's funny, right? You're still using EC2 with EKS as an example, but it's just hidden from you, right? It's not hidden so much, but it's automated. The control plane, of course, they take care of, and that's fine. The worker nodes is what I'm talking about, right? It's still using EC2 instances at the end of the day, okay? Except you're not having to go into EC2, create a VM, install the AMI image, and then do your Kubernetes implementation. They handle that all for you right through EKS, as you know. And of course, EKS has other functionality that people like, right? They like the scaling part of it, the cluster scaling part of it, and things like that. And so we think that you should still leverage these things, but you should do it in a uniform environment. And so, for example, when we deploy our production grade Kubernetes core services, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes around observability and ingress and those things, you can still leverage those with EKS. The only difference is you can't use we use MetalLB for pretty much our on-prem solutions, but in the cloud you'll use the cloud load balancer. Okay, and that's the only difference. Okay, so that was real quick on the Node OS types. Let's get back to the diagram and how to deploy this. So basically, again, you'll have a Linux distro, like whether it's running in WSL or you have a VM somewhere, or you run Linux on your workstation itself. That's fine. You have to have these things installed, and if you're in an air-gapped environment, you actually have to have a registry that you've already deployed. Now, you can do this in a couple different ways. Okay, you could already have a registry deployed. You can deploy it in a VM, or you can deploy it right on the machine. I mean, you could just use Docker registry if you want and run it right locally on the machine just for the air-gapped deployment. Okay, and air-gapped is another thing. I've heard people talk about air-gapped a lot. And what are the differences are? And I mean, generally speaking, air-gapped is you don't have ingress or egress from that environment. But I've seen air-gapped, from a Bastion or jump box, where that's even air-gapped, right? Or that it doesn't have internet access. At some point, you have to be able to get the bits from Nutanix, right, or from these things, obviously, and you're going to get them from an online repo. It's somewhere, whether it's like Helm or kubectl or Docker or Podman. You're gonna have to go to Nutanix and download the image. You're gonna have to go to the website and download it at some point. So you're gonna have to get these packages and these bits, and you're gonna have to upload them regardless on the machine. Okay, so at some point you're gonna have that. And then of course the registry, right, is being able to upload all of the images that required, right, to actually do the deployment, including the Nutanix Node OS image, right, from that local registry during the deployment. If you're in a non-air-gapped environment, we'll just download those things from Docker, and you'll have to log in with your Docker Hub credentials because you will reach rate limits, right, from a Docker perspective, rate pull limits, if you don't log in with your account when you actually do it in a non-air-gapped environment. Okay. So now that we have the Bastion host, what happens when we actually deploy? So, well, when we deploy, Let me just go here. Hopefully these things will come up here. When we deploy, you're going to have to define all the variables. So I'll just do this instead because this will be easier. Because I have it already installed. So if I do nkp cluster create, right? It's going to say, well, what am I create, right? So I'm going to do npm cluster Nutanix. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I have this backwards. Hang on. Yeah. So if you do an nkp create clusters, this is after you have, the nkp image, or excuse me, nkp package installed. You're going to have to define all of these things in variables, right? Not all of them, all the things that are relevant. So for example, if you want to change the control plane, vCPU, and disk size and those things, you have the ability to do that. Of course, you're going to want it to be self-managed, because if it's not self-managed, it's not going to be a management cluster. It's not going to be able to manage itself. Okay, so when you initially deploy, okay, you're going to have to export a lot of these variables. And I showed you this in episode 5 a little bit. So if you're wondering what this looks like, go back to episode 5 and look at the nkp deployment through a manual process through the CLI. And so you'll determine these values, export them, and then you'll go through and you'll actually do the create cluster command with those variables. Okay, and when you do that, it's going to actually deploy nkp. Now, I just want to talk about this, what that looks like though. And I'm only giving you the example of deploying on Nutanix. I'm not talking about deploying it on VMware, Bare Metal, or AWS. That's a little bit different. Okay, but in Nutanix, what happens is on your Linux machine, we create the Bootstrap cluster, which is a kind Kubernetes cluster, okay? And you'll see that Bootstrap container kick off. And what happens is we use Cluster API. So we're not using Terraform or anything like that for the infrastructure piece of this. We're using Cluster API to do the infrastructure side of it. And Cluster API controller will actually run, right, from the workstation during the deployment. And then after the deployment, it hits the target, okay? And then Cluster API then gets basically moved over here on the control plane cluster, okay? Because you want the control plane cluster, the management cluster, to run Cluster API, because that's what's going to now, you're going to deploy your clusters from. Okay, so you have the management cluster now, it's up. It's a Kubernetes cluster itself. By default, it deploys 4 control plane nodes and 3 worker nodes. And there is a default minimum requirements because we run all of the other services, okay, to make Kubernetes production grade. And that's the point. So in OCP, you have the idea of infra, right? Infra cluster or infra nodes. Those infra nodes run all of the Red Hat, OpenShift core service components to make it production grade. We have the management cluster. That management cluster pretty much does a similar thing, but runs all of the core services needed to make it production grade. So what does that mean? What are the core services? So when we log back in to the dashboard, so as soon as that's deployed, you're going to get a URL and a login, and it's going to give you a temporary username and password to log in. When you log in, you're going to be logged in what's called, we have 3 versions of NKP. We have Starter, Pro, and Ultimate. It'll automatically be set to Starter until you license it, okay? Most customers are going to consume Pro and Ultimate because of the added feature capabilities. And the added feature capabilities are really around, I'm going to go into the management cluster and show you, are really around these core features around making a production grade Kubernetes cluster. Now, Starter will get you going, right? From load balancing perspective and things like that. But it's not going to provide you observability. It's not going to provide you, for example, GitOps. It's not going to provide you fleet management. So if you need to do multi-cluster, multiple fleets of Kubernetes across your enterprise in the cloud, et cetera, it's not going to allow you to do that. You need enterprise for that, as an example. Okay. When I apply enterprise, these other services automatically get deployed within the cluster. I don't check a box to say, okay, enable Grafana, enable Loki, all of these things, enable Prometheus. I don't do that. It does it for you. So all you do is apply the license from starter to Pro or Ultimate, and it'll deploy those platform applications that are assigned to Pro or Ultimate. I have Ultimate, and so I have all the feature sets. Okay, and this is what I'm talking about in making it, simplifying the process. So instead of you going out there and saying, well, I have Kubernetes, I'm going to choose Kubernetes, but I don't really know what I'm going to use for observability. I don't know what I'm going to use for ingress. I really don't know what I'm going to use for load balancing. What am I going to use for OPA? How am I going to control costs? What does my registry service look like? Okay. You're going to have to figure all those things out. And what we're doing is, this is what I was talking about with undifferentiated value. And I know this is probably not gonna, be very comfortable in me saying this, because I know a lot of folks out there are proud of what they built, and I get it. I understand that. But let me just tell you, you're providing what's called undifferentiated value. The CXO doesn't care that you're using Harbor. The CXO doesn't care that you're using Grafana. Okay? All the CXO cares about is, are the applications being modernized? At what rate are they being modernized? And are you innovating? Are you giving the services back to the developers so they can innovate? That's what CX level cares about. Okay? They don't, again, as much as we like to be in the weeds as engineers, and believe me, I like to be in the weeds too. I like to look at, I think Grafana is great from a visualization perspective. I think Loki's great, right? All these things are great from an engineer level perspective. But the CXO doesn't care about those things. And that's what I'm talking about with undifferentiated value. And so instead of you guys spending time on that, how about we deploy a production grade Kubernetes platform for you, and now you can just give access to your developers. Okay? Because that's what developers want. That's what CXO, and by the way, that's where the innovation is happening. Innovation's not happening here. Okay? And what I mean by that is customer-facing business innovation. Innovation's happening here, of course, but I'm talking about business-enabled innovation, or innovation-enabling business. Excuse me. That's happening at the developer level. And so our goal is to make sure that developers have the tools they need to consume and simply consume and not be blocked by barriers, right? Meaning they're not going out, swiping a credit card, going to AWS. I'll do it. They shouldn't be managing Kubernetes. Okay? They should be developing customer experiences, next-gen experiences, and building great software to be competitive. That's what developers should be doing. Now, there is two schools of thought, right? Obviously, there are developers that develop software for customer-facing services, right? For customer-facing. And there's internal, right? And even within IT, I say there's developers, right? And it goes back to, and I have a lot of conversations. You wouldn't believe the conversations I have today, even with people that are doing infrastructure as code, right? They're still not following a Git process, which is boggles my mind to, today. Even infrastructure as code, I say that you're software engineers. You're building scripts and code, right? I mean, you're using providers like Terraform and things like that. But those things should be versioned and checked in through a Git process and validated and leveraged through that. I can't tell you how many customers I still go to where their scripts or their Terraform code is still sitting on a file share. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. And so innovation is happening at the customer-facing innovation, and service innovation for business is happening at the developer level. Innovation internally in the IT department or in the platform engineering or SRE layer is innovation you're delivering to your customer, which is developers, right? Or the end users consuming the service. Okay. And so that's what's important. And so this platform is geared to get infrastructure for modern apps quickly into the hands of developers, right? From a consumption perspective, not from a management perspective. I want to be very clear about that. And at the same time, provide innovation to platform engineers and SREs, right? The SREs are going to want to have the ability to look at logs, right? Through Grafana, Loki. They're going to want to look at all those things. They're going to have NKP. So we have what's called insights as an example. They're going to want to look at what's going on in the clusters. Okay, so you want to give them the ability to have that. And so they don't have to build that. It's already built for you. From a platform engineering perspective, is what kind of service capability can I deliver back to my developers, right? One of the services we talked about last week or the week before was AI. And the fact that I can deploy AI right within this solution, right? And being able to deliver those APIs back to, those model APIs, inference APIs back to my developers, as an example. Making sure that I'm delivering on things like, non-sexy things like backup and disaster recovery, but are still critical to the business, or through policies, right? And we're gating policies through Gatekeeper, as an example, through OPA. Those are important to platform engineers. And so this platform is for platform engineers and SREs to quickly deploy and get developers to consume. And that's the value of NKP, okay? And being able to do that anywhere and unified. So what I mean by unified is all those environments I talked about that we support, all those substrates of bare metal and cloud and VMware and Nutanix, that it all looks and operates the same from a Kubernetes perspective, okay? Or similar, right? As close as we can. So they all get the same logging stack. They all get the same dashboards, right? It all looks the same, whether they're running in AWS or they're running on-prem. And there's something to be said for that. And not a lot of folks are doing that. We did the similar fashion with our NC2 solution, which is our HCI stack, our core AOS solution with AHV running on any cloud, giving that same experience. And that's being adopted broadly because customers are able to get the same exact experience of on-prem as in the cloud, and they're still able to take advantage of cloud services. The same applies here. The ability to get the same unified experience, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, and still take advantage of those cloud services. Okay. One other thing I want to point out is, because I'm running this on Nutanix, there is more native integration. This is what I talked about in the beginning of this. And I know I'm going long today, but I'll try to wrap it up here in the next 10, 15 minutes. The innovation is the integration that's already there, right? And it's by design. So for example, we already have native CSI that's integrated. So when I deployed this cluster, so let's go to this cluster. Let's see what cluster I'm on now. Okay, get nodes OY. So I'm in the management cluster. You can see here. All right, I'm in NKP management. That's the management cluster. I have other clusters deployed, and we're going to get to that in the next episodes as we deploy clusters and applications. But I really wanted to focus on the reason why, the benefits of NKP. So now that I'm in the management cluster, I just want to go here and say NKP get pod. Let's go all namespace. Excuse me, I'm using NKP. Get pod. Wow, I can't type today. So you can see here that I already have the CSI integration already here. I didn't install Nutanix CSI provider. It was already installed. Okay, so right off the bat, I'm now able to consume storage services from the platform. Right off the bat. Very, very simple. And I have snapshot capability in those things. Okay. I also have other things that we talked about, like Harbor as an example. Okay. And the ability to use Harbor with our other data services like objects. So we have what's called, and I say in my lab setup, but we have also Cozy driver for Nutanix objects. So the ability to actually deploy the Cozy driver, let's look and see what this looks like. Right? I'm pointing to my Prism Central. I'm logging, I'm providing my login information, my objects endpoint, and my key. And now I have a bucket within objects hopefully I'm signed in here still. Let's just go to objects. That's dedicated to Harbor for my images, right? And here it is right here. Automatically gets created. I didn't create this. I didn't manually create this. Cozy created, we did this through NKP. Okay. So you can see here the interoperability I'm talking about. I think last week we talked about the integration of read write many storage access with files. Okay, so let's go and see what that looks like. So all I have to do is basically create a storage class, okay, that points to my filer, and I create an API user on filer to allow NKP to leverage files for my read write many storage services. Okay, so let's go in here. You see my filer and look at the shares. All these PVCs are leveraged through Kubernetes, through NKP. Okay, that you see here. The test share is just an SMB share. But these are dynamically created when I create a PVC, these NFS shares on Filer. I don't have to go in, create a files mount, an NFS share, do all the information, and then go back to Kubernetes and then mount it, and align it to that PVC. I don't have to do that. I can have NKP dynamically create these NFS shares. This is by design. This is the integration I'm talking about. And by the way, these things I'm showing you with objects, right? And files and all, you don't even have to leverage NKP. You can be on OpenShift and still leverage the same functionality. Okay. Or you can be on Rancher as an example. So with data services, you have that. One thing that we haven't covered yet, and we have to get there, is NDB, which is our database as a service platform. Okay. And, just like you have RDS in AWS, right? What do you do similarly on-prem? Well, you don't really have that capability. So Nutanix provides NDB, which is our database as a service, which basically allows us to give you that RDS-like capability. Okay, I would say it's even more mature, not mature, but more advanced from an innovative and feature set than RDS. And people be like, well, RDS has been out for a long time, but RDS is bound by the limitations of the underlying infrastructure. Nutanix is using the underlying infrastructure to enable the innovation. Our time machine, being able to clone or recover up to a second your database, or being able to do copy data management for devs, and then do that programmatically through what we call a Kubernetes operator, NDB operator for NKP or OpenShift as an example. So being able to programmatically deliver a database as a service, still using the Kubernetes framework, right? That people want to, which is great for platform engineers or data scientists or and even the DBAs, because the DBAs don't want to have to manually do that. They want it to be automated. Being able to provision database, operationalize it, upgrade, patch it, copy data management, protect it, all those things, right? DBAs would love to see that automated, and they do. And so customers that leverage NDB, they love the automation around that. And then tying that back into the data services we can deliver through Kubernetes is great. And, we're looking at things like roadmap things, for example, around network security for containers, database as a service on Kubernetes in containers, right? In pods, as an example, like Cloud Native Postgres, those types of things. Those are things that are on the roadmap, okay, that are not very far around the corner. Okay, so being able to leverage, Kubernetes natively for databases versus using a virtual machine or virtual machines for databases. RDS doesn't do that. RDS still uses EC2 instances, right? So you're still leveraging VMs in the back end, even for RDS. And the experience has been the best on virtual machines up to this point with databases right now. Okay, there's some challenges with databases on Kubernetes. It's getting better. Cloud Native Postgres, things like that are making it easier, making it better. And that's another thing. That's another reason why we support that, right? So when you go back to NKP as an example, right? One of the things we also support is Cloud Native Postgres. So being able to, and you can see here I have it enabled, and I have it enabled because I'm using Cloud Native Postgres as the database for Harbor for my registry instance. Okay. So, I know this was kind of long-winded talk and I only showed you a little bit, but I really wanted to just give you foundationally, take a step back foundationally to reasons why customers are asking for full platforms with integration, right? They're not asking for platforms where they want to stitch things together or reference architectures where they have to stitch things together and rely on the reference architecture. And by the way, go through that that horrible upgrade process. I mean, even in VBlock, going back to that, even though it was a reference design, VCE still wanted to do the upgrades and charge you 35, 40 grand a pop for the upgrades. I was a partner, so I know exactly how much it cost, and I sold it and I delivered it. So I know exactly how those things played out at customers. It didn't give you the ability to operationalize so much. It started with the single support model. It just didn't give you that capability to operationalize it, and that's what NKP does, and not just for Kubernetes. And we're going to talk about that in the coming episodes of what does an upgrade, right? What does operations look like with NKP? What does upgrade of Kubernetes look like? What does upgrade of the NKP platform? What does upgrade of all of these core services look like, right? Because those all have to align with Kubernetes versions, right? And interoperability, okay, around that. And we manage that for you, the interoperability of that, and then we give you a way of upgrading this platform completely, right? NKP, Kubernetes, and all the platform services that we support around it, right, to make it production ready. And that's one of the other beauties of NKP is that operational aspect of it. Okay, so I'm going to end for today. Next week is the day before I go on vacation, so I will do a pre-vacation live stream next week. My hope is to really get into. I can't do the upgrades yet because I'm on the latest right now. I'm waiting for the next version to release so we can actually go through the upgrade process, and I'll walk you through that on one episode. But I think next week we'll really focus on air gap deployments. Just looking at the deployment process and walking through that, and then how you consume, right? How to get started, right? And when you log in first, right, you log in under a global workspace. And we're going to talk about workspace and projects, and it's really important too. It's going to walk you through how to get started, right? You're going to first set up your identity provider, your users. We're going to talk about workspace. We're going to activate the license. We're going to show you what that all looks like. Okay. So again, I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Those that watch golf, I hope you enjoy the Masters. I'm rooting for Scheffler again to win. One of the things that really bothers me though, and I was talking to my friends about this, is it's just there's just not a lot of excitement in the players anymore around the Masters, right? Around golf. Like Tiger, Phil, those guys really brought excitement to the game. And really, kind of put you on the edge of your seat. In my opinion, I don't see that much anymore. Like Scheffler, he's kind of got a blah personality, to be honest with you. Bryson's kind of a little bit, if Bryson wins, I'll be happy too. I think Bryson is a polarizing figure in golf as well. So hopefully we'll see some of that this weekend and into tomorrow. So again, enjoy. I hope the weather where you are is great. We're not quite there yet up here in upstate New York. We're still at the edge of winter. Actually, it actually snowed last week. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks it'll start breaking or we'll start getting warm weather. I hope you have a very productive week ahead next week. And I hope these are valuable and you're getting something out of it. The goal here is to obviously educate everyone on what Nutanix platform delivers, and not have these one-offs of third parties going off and trying Nutanix and saying, oh, it's not ready for whatever, or I wouldn't use Nutanix, when they have no clue about what Nutanix is or how customers are leveraging Nutanix. We have customers running tens of thousands of virtual machines on Nutanix, big enterprise customers, and it's growing exponentially, as you know, from the Broadcom VMware acquisition. They're looking at other platforms, and they're looking at platforms differently. It goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning. They're not looking at stitched together platforms. They're looking at unifying vendor, collapsing vendors, not having much vendor sprawl and vendor management. But they're looking at platforms that give them choice, which is a differentiator, right? They want platforms that don't lock them in. And I laugh about this because at some point you're going to have to choose a platform where you plant a flag and say, I have to go with this. But does that platform holistically provide you flexibility and choice around portability of licensing, what vendors I want to work with from a infrastructure perspective, whether it's server A vendor to server D vendor, server N, whatever you want to call it, right? Vendor. What storage solution I want to leverage. And you'll see that is starting to play out at Nutanix with PowerFlex. Some other announcements hopefully coming around .next, which is coming soon. And of course, really giving you that flexibility and choice around Kubernetes, how you run it, where you run it. Same thing with VMs, how you run, where you run, on what substrate you want to run. Our mantra is apps and data, right? You're anywhere, running apps and data anywhere. And that's kind of, what we do at Nutanix. That's a differentiator between us and our competition. So I hope you're seeing value there. Again, hope you have a great week. And I look forward to doing more of these, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care.